being a Christian in many ways hinders our ability to actually accept this as a true foundational principle in relationships. And the reason for that is the following. I spoke about being islands. I know we've got international congregation here. What I mean by that is that we say we don't need anybody. Now, we can handle things by ourselves because that's what society teaches us. Both men and women. Men are particularly trained in this way in a really bad and ugly fashion. And what makes this even worse is the following. If you're in the world, you're an atheist. All you have as an atheist is yourself and the humans around you. And if it's your spouse, then it's just you and your spouse, and that's it. And if your spouse leaves you and you're on your own, there's just you, and there's nowhere else you can go. And many people can go to rock bottom. They can just drop out of society and totally be destroyed if things got really bad. Now, you might think, well, that's really horrible for them. And I'm suggesting that it's not so horrible for them. Because it's like this. If you stood on the edge of a cliff, you've got two options. You're either going to fall off the cliff, or you're going to stay on the edge of the cliff, or you're going to stay on land. And most people, when they look over the cliff, they will not want to jump or fall or trip over. I'm not talking about suicide. I didn't mean it in that context. So if you're an atheist and all you've got is your wife or nothing, you're probably going to stick with your wife. The problem is that when you're a Christian, I'm going to say Christians like us, inherently conservative Christians, our problem is this, that if you've got a problem with your wife, or say your wife, you've got a problem with your husband, if things are not going right, where can you turn to? You can turn to God. And the problem with that is, not that I'm saying it's inappropriate to be a Christian and to pray to God. I want to be understood correctly. The problem that happens is we cheapen our human relationships by turning to God and thinking that we can get through our time here on earth by destroying our relationships that God has given to us and having this relationship with Him. And the problem is far too many of us are in this situation. You have an argument with your spouse and you say, oh, it's because my spouse is out of Christ, they're wrong. If they were Christians, which goes back to one of the previous questions, can we go in ministry together and have a happy, loving relationship? Because our partner is so bad, we switch off our partners and then we turn to God. Because that's where we can find solace. If you didn't have God, can someone off their mic? If you didn't have God, you couldn't do that. But far too many of us do it far too quickly and far too easily. We shut down in our human relationships and we turn to God, and essentially we complain to Him or we feel sorry for ourselves. And the complaint is one of two things. I'm such a bad person, or my spouse is such a bad person. And whilst I'm not trying to say that we should communicate with God and we should pray and that we should have a spiritual walk with Him, what I am saying is that because we have these wrong models of the construction of a human being, the nature of man as we might call it, that our fundamental need is to demand affection and to be loved. We have this other model that we can stand by ourselves, and Christians such as ourselves are in the greatest danger of that, because when we say by ourselves, what we actually mean is us and Christ, us and the Holy Spirit, that we're together and we can face the world. Because we have this mentality, we're not just not prepared to really be serious about our human relationships, to really fight for them and do what we can to save and maintain them. Worse than that, we're not even educated along those lines. So it's not even a conscious decision. In many cases, it's an unconscious decision, and we're making these huge mistakes because we think we can manage by ourselves, but we don't say by ourselves. We would never say that. We say we'll turn to Christ, and Christ will support us through this difficult relationship. And I'm saying, if you're in a difficult relationship, either with your children, because you hate them, because you're fed up with them, or you're in a marriage relationship, or they're the ones I want to focus on just in this context in our discussion. If you're in that situation, I want us to recognise that almost 100%, can almost guarantee it, the reason why you're having this problem is because you don't understand the nature of man. And what I mean by that is you don't understand one fundamental principle by which humans were constructed. And it's that this need of affection, this need of warmth, this need of love never diminishes. In fact, as a person grows, I would suspect that it would grow. This affection, this demand for affection, this demand to be needed and cared for only grows. It doesn't lessen. So when someone asks, what does equality look like in a married couple? It goes beyond doing the chores, because if you're rich enough, you can pay someone to do the chores, and neither of you have to do any chores. So that's pretty equal, isn't it? It's not just about being respectful to one another. I've argued this back in 2017 about how much sin we do. And I argue that I could produce numerous people in the movement, in the church, in the world, who never sin, who are completely without sin for decades. And the example that I gave is, I'll just go back to the banker. You work in a bank and you're a bank clerk, a bank teller, and you meet customers. You're in customer relations. Now, you will always be sinless in your role as a customer relations officer, because your livelihood depends upon it. You won't sin. You won't bring your baggage to work with you. I don't know how many of you have studied, there's a book called The Power of Habit. If any of you have read it, I'm not particularly recommending it, but the author goes through certain examples in his book, and one of them is the model of Starbucks. I believe it's Starbucks. And it's about how they train their staff. And what they do is they train them in a way that they make people feel special. And that's what makes Starbucks such a good place. They're trained to remember the first names of regular customers, to know what their regular order is, to pay them special attention so that they become repeat customers and you just make more money. So what I'm saying is, in examples like that, it's easy to be respectful. Anyone and everyone can do that. I've given so many examples of this. You know, if I were to enter into your bank account, if I hacked your bank account and got into it, and I took out, depending on where you are, $20, 20 euros, 20 pounds, every time you were rude or disrespectful to your spouse or to your children or to someone, sin would stop within 24 hours in a day. It would stop, because people would be motivated